Welcome to our AP Invoice Automation web series, also known as APIA. My name is Ben Nichols and I am an APIA consultant with RPI Consultants. This web series provides insight into the process and flow of the APIA solution. We cover topics such as approval via emails, searching for invoices within the solution, and other key aspects of APIA. Be sure to check out our additional videos available on our YouTube channel, RPI Consultants. In today's video, we will cover invoice approvals via email. This also includes APIA's web interface approval process, and we'll also review how approvers can approve, reject, and reassign invoices. Let's go ahead and jump in and take a look together. We're going to go ahead and start our presentation off by reviewing the invoice approval email template. What you'll see presented on the screen is the email itself. We include the subject, which can house data points that reference APIA data, such as invoice number or name or vendor name in the subject line. We also have the ability to include data points within inside of the body of the email, which we'll review here shortly. APIA offers the ability to attach the invoice image as a PDF to the email in the event that the imaging solution or business process includes a PDF image within APIA. In today's example, we'll see that the invoice image has been attached to the email. If we click on the image, we'll get a representation of the invoice either in the default PDF viewer of your computer or within inside of the Outlook email message. If we take a look at the email body, we'll see that additional data points from APIA have been included. This includes data points such as invoice number, invoice amount, invoice date, and invoice due date, vendor, description, purchase order if applicable, the AP clerk name, current approver name, and routing category description. APIA provides you the ability to add verbiage into the email template that helps guide the approver through the approval process. As you can see, we've added our own verbiage up top. An invoice has been submitted for your approval. See attachment for invoice image. At the bottom of the email body, we'll see that we have chosen to include a link to approve the invoice from the email message. There are multiple ways to approve invoices through APIA, one of which is through the Rich Client application. You may see this in future presentations provided by RPI on the APIA solution, but in today's example, we'll be reviewing the APIA Web Interface approval process. To access that, we'll actually be clicking the link available in the email, which will then present us with the following web page. Once you've logged into the APIA Web Interface for invoice approval, you'll see you have two tabs under My Invoices. First, we have the Pending Approval tab, which will actually give you your username and then any of the work items that are assigned to you. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. And then we have the Historical tab. The Historical tab provides information about past invoices that you have approved or rejected, includes it in a historical view. As you can see, this will include some base header level information, and then to the far right, if the image is attached to the invoice, the image is accessible and viewable from the historical pane. As you can see, back in our pending approval section, under work units, we have a work unit for invoice test of custom email. So this is our actual invoice number at this point. And this is letting you know that as an approver, you have to review the invoice number or name test of custom email. So this is our example for today. And what we'll actually do is we'll go ahead and open up this example. When an approval is sent out to an approver, a work unit is generated, and this is where we access our actual invoice. So if we double click on that option on our previous screen, we'll actually be presented with the invoice. What we see here in our first tab and on our first screen is the information associated with the invoice. So invoice, and this would be the invoice number or name, test of custom email, for vendor, a bundle of love, flowers, and gift, which is actually gift. As you can see in our pending approval section, if we go down to our work items, I have a work item waiting for me to approve. A work item is equivalent to an invoice awaiting approval, and when an invoice is pushed by an AP clerk or processor through the approval process, it then generates a work item or a work unit specific to the approver. What you can see is I'll come down to my list and I'll click on my first invoice to approve. And then my invoice will actually load. Up top, we'll see the information on the invoice, which may include the invoice number or name, and then the vendor associated with the invoice. We then have the ability to go back to the home screen. We have the ability to approve the invoice, to reject the invoice, and to reassign the invoice. Before we walk through all three of those processes, we'll actually take a look at the invoice information. On our first tab, we have the invoice header level information, which includes aspects like company, vendor, invoice number or name, invoice date, due date, and several other additional fields associated with the invoice. In our next tab, we'll have our distribution section. Now, depending on your business process or the solution design for your environment, we'll have the ability to either, as an approver, add distribution lines, or in some scenarios, you'll already have distribution lines added to the invoice before it comes through to approval. In the event that you need to add invoice lines, we just click the Add button. Inside of this screen, it will provide us an actual GL entry screen where we can enter in the distributions and total up the dollar amount for the invoice. I'll actually go back. Next up, we've got our related document section. In this area, we have the ability to add additional documents. So if you have documents associated with the invoice that you'd like to keep for the history of the invoice, you have the ability to upload it through this location. You also have the ability to view the invoice image if it's attached to the invoice. We'll actually run through an example of this later on using the historical view. Next up, we have our Errors tab. And what the Errors tab is going to do is it's going to give you any information on whether there's information missing at the header level or if there's information missing at the distribution level. The Errors section is going to provide you an area to view any errors associated with the invoice, whether that be a header level information issue, such as a missing invoice number or dollar amount, or whether it's an invalid information error where you have a distribution amount that is not equal to the invoice amount. This will just alert the approver or the processor what remaining work is needed on the invoice. In the approval history section, we'll see a history of all actions taken on the invoice. As you can see, we've been using this invoice example several times throughout our training and testing, and so we have a history log of all the actions taken on this invoice. Let's go ahead and chat about our approve, reject, and reassign buttons. In the event that the invoice is prepared and ready to move on through the approval process, we'll want to approve the invoice. So we've checked to ensure there's no remaining errors, or whatever errors remain are an acceptable error during the approval process, just depending on the business solution and process. We can go ahead and select the Approve button, and at that point, the invoice will be saved and it will move on through the approval process, either identifying whether there is an additional approver needed or whether the approval process is complete and the invoice is ready to be sent to Lawson for payment. Next, we have our Reject button. Our Reject button will actually allow us to reject the invoice, and at that point, a screen will be presented to the approver where they will have to select a reason code. Reason codes are configurable aspects inside of APIA that allow the customer to configure a set of reasons of why a rejection would occur. In this example, we have a miscellaneous rejection. We'll go ahead and select the miscellaneous rejection, and as part of the APIA process, an action comment is required. This justifies whatever action has been selected by the approver. I am rejecting as an example for our training. What will happen with this is the reason code and the action comment will then be put on the invoice, and you will be able to view it from the approval history and see exactly why an invoice was rejected. In the event I wanted to actually reject this invoice, I would simply select OK. The invoice would be saved, and it would then be routed back for further processing. Please check out our additional videos to learn more about the APIA process. In the event that we're going to reassign the invoice, we have the ability to determine whether we want to escalate this to a different level or a different user. Now, it's important to note that in order to reassign, you must navigate to the lower section of the invoice header fields and select the approval level that you want to reassign to. So let's go ahead and click the drop-down. What the approver is going to be presented with is in a list of their approval set. So when you define an approval matrix, it defines who needs to approve this specific invoice and at what level or dollar amount. Now, in this scenario, we have approval levels based on a role. So we have a non-PO level 1, non-PO level 2, 3, and 4. In some solutions, depending on the business's needs, this will be a username instead of a role, and it will be assigned to a specific user, such as myself or another individual. If we want to reassign, we select the level or the user we want to reassign with inside of that approval structure, and then we have to add a comment saying why we want to reassign this invoice. In this example, we're going to reassign to approval level 2, and we're required to add a comment. I would like approver 2 to review, as this invoice is not at my dollar threshold. Just an example of a comment that will then be forwarded on. When I add this comment, it actually gets saved to the approval history of the invoice and lets the next approver who receives this invoice understand what actions were taken on the invoice. Now that I've filled out the Reassign to Level 2 option and added my comment, I have the ability to click the Reassign button. Now what this will do is it will take the level that I've selected with inside of the dropdown, and it will escalate and transfer this invoice to the level 2 approval. Last but not least, if we select the back button, it'll take us back to our My Invoices section, which is going to load, and it would show any additional invoices that I need to approve with inside of the listing. I then can also go to the historical view, and I can again see any invoices that I've approved or rejected. I want to go ahead and show us an example of an invoice with an image associated with it. As you can see, you can click the link here to get the image. I'll actually download the image to a PDF. Next, we can select the invoice as well. We have several options to view the invoice. We can view the image via the View Image link. We can also navigate to the Related Documents section and see that we have the Test Invoice, Document Type Invoice, and the ability to click the Attachment link, which will then download our attachment and present us with an invoice in our local PDF viewers. In today's video, we covered invoice approvals via email, APIA's Web Interface approval process, and an approver's ability to approve, reject, and reassign an invoice. We appreciate you taking the time today to join us for our invoice approvals via email presentation. We also encourage you to check out additional videos on APIA or other services and solutions provided by RPI on our YouTube channel, RPI Consultants. If you have any interest in APIA or any other services or solutions provided by RPI Consultants, please visit us at www.rpic.com.